Welcome, everyone, to It's a Wrap with Rap. I am your host, Ron Rappaport. This podcast features people who have overcome life's challenges and adversities, people who can inspire and motivate, people who can educate us on an assortment of topics. My guest today is Kitt O'Malley. Kitt has been one of the leading mental health advocates for several years through her widely known social media presence and her groundbreaking blog, which has chronicled her lifelong journey with bipolar disorder. Her goals are to affect change, break down barriers to care, and to educate people about mental illness. Kitt's perspective is additionally unique in that she is trained as a psychotherapist and she practiced for a time as a licensed mental health professional. Kitt is a supporter of the podcast, and her book, Balancing Act, Writing Through a Bipolar Life, provides us a finite roadmap and brutally honest glimpse inside the daily frustrations living with mental illness. Kitt's writing recounts 2 decades it took to receive a proper diagnosis and how her journey gave her purpose. Welcome, Kitt, to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, our pleasure. I noticed that you organized your book, which I read, great book, into 5 themes. I will try to follow those themes in our discussion. Would you explain why those themes were important to you?
Well, it's interesting. My first edition of the book just sort of chronologically dumped my blog posts. And it just wasn't, I knew it needed to be organized. And so when I went back and rewrote the book, I got help with the developmental editor, and he read stuff and we discussed what were the themes, in my blog, in what I've written. And we came up with these themes and then organized the writing into those themes. And that enabled it to be more cohesive and have an introduction to, theme, and then organize the topics, the blog posts in that theme. And so they were, it's been so long since I wrote the book, and even since I information for you. So I probably won't even remember what the themes are, but I do know that they included, living with bipolar or being a caretaker, mental health advocacy. Well, that's 3 of them.
Yeah, well, good. Well, I know what they are, so I'm going to follow them. Let's first talk about your mental health journey. Tell us about your years growing up before college, and when did you first know that you needed help for your mental health?
Yeah, I actually didn't know until I was a freshman at UCLA. Before that, I moved a lot. I had we followed my father's career. We moved from coast to coast and overseas. So I had an interesting upbringing, sort of what is described as a third culture kid. In that I lived in Saudi Arabia for 5 years, and a third culture kid, similar to actually living with a mental illness, in that you're sort of outside of your parents' culture and outside of the culture you're living in.
Sure.
And so you learn to sort of straddle these worlds and to see different perspectives. And that actually helped me. I think that upbringing helped me to a certain extent in dealing with mental health and also in being a provider, because I'm able to have that perspective of being able to be inside and outside of something.
So tell us, when did you first know that you needed help?
When I was 18, at UCLA, I became suicidal. And at first I had suicidal ideation. And then finally one day I had gathered the means, I'd gathered a bunch of pills together. I wrote a suicide note. I had scheduled a time that I was going to go make this phone call, and then I was going to take the medication and leave the suicide note. And all of a sudden I realized, looking at myself, oh my gosh, this time I'm actually going to do it. And so what I did was I called a friend who lived in the dorms, and I said, would you please come over and hang out with me? And I went to my resident assistant on the floor of the dorms, and I said, I need to see somebody today. So I saw a psychologist at UCLA who practiced cognitive behavioral therapy, and I did that, which helped me sort of get through the crisis and just stopping those beliefs, those thoughts, and sort of rewriting them, and trying to contain that crisis. So that was when I knew that I had depression, and it was a very severe depression. It was I wouldn't wish that hell on anybody.
Right.
And it's amazing because when you look at people's depressive thoughts, they're the same thoughts.
Yeah.
Where all of these people with all different sorts of experiences and lives, it's like, and they have exactly the same script. And it's amazing how that is.
What were your working years like? And tell us about meeting your future husband and becoming a mother.
Okay. Well, I was a workaholic. So I ended up graduating I started out as a biochem major. I wanted to be a doctor. And then because of the suicide ideation and the depression, I quit that and ended up graduating from Berkeley as a legal studies major. And I wanted to see if I wanted to become a lawyer. So I became a legal assistant and I worked crazy hours, like until 10:30 at night. And
Yeah.
I would just do that and I would crash. And then I would start again and I would crash. And so I did that. I ended up crashing, taking time off and going to grad school, becoming a psychologist, not a psychologist, a master's level psychotherapist licensed in California. I treated severely emotionally disturbed adolescents and pregnant and parenting teenagers. And I worked in a battered women's shelter when I was in grad school as an administrator. And so I did that until I, again, burned out, depression, severe depression, couldn't get out of bed. Um, and I ended up having to, I went to a psychiatrist, was given medications and started to become ramped up to mania and had a week of severe mania. Tried to get up by my bootstraps after that. My friend actually called my parents to come up and help. They're like, Kitt needs help now. And she did the same with my church. So the priest, Kitt needs help now. Would you please go and intervene? And
Right.
I tried with my parents' help to get back up on my feet and just take a temp job. And I just wasn't able to do it. So I moved back in with my parents and sort of rebuilt from the ground up, going to psychiatrists and therapists. And I ended up having a career in commercial real estate for a decade. But again, I wasn't diagnosed bipolar, even though I'd had that week of mania, because
Yeah.
they considered it what they call iatrogenic, which is caused by the medication. It was caused by the treatment, is how they saw it at that time. And so I, but I just did the same thing in terms of being a workaholic. And then, right before I moved, actually, when I was still going through this
Yeah.
crisis, my sister and her then boyfriend came and visited me, and I heard from her boyfriend that he had 4 brothers. And I was like, 4 brothers? Hey, I
Hey.
moved to LA. If any of them are going to be in LA, you
Right.
know, hook us up. Give me their number. And it turned out that he had a brother who was single, who was moving to Southern California, and so we ended up dating too. And a year after they married, we married. So in the midst of all this crisis, I met my soulmate. I mean, we're still married, so that was a long time ago. And it'll be 25 years we've been married.
25 years. Wow.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
So yeah. And he actually, on one of our first dates, and here I was, working just started as a temp file clerk,
Right.
former psychotherapist, now working as a file clerk, living with my parents at 31. And my husband, he was then date, said, you are the most independent woman I've ever met. And I just started to laugh. And I'm like, I'm living with my parents. I'm working as a file clerk. How can you say I'm independent? He's like, no, really, you are. And actually, I've been told, he just saw who I was rather
Yeah.
than the illness, which
Right.
was great.
Yeah.
He saw beyond my circumstances of what my brain was going through at
Sure.
the time.
Sure.
So so I kind of knew he was a good guy. So yeah, we've been married a long time. We had a son, and when I had the son is when at one point when he was about 27 months old, I started to have these euphoric symptoms again, and I realized, wait a minute, this is hypomania or mania. I realized as a mother I could not let this go. I could not. So I got treatment and ended up on actually getting falling apart again. even though I was getting treatment, and was hospitalized. And I actually haven't been back to work since then. That was when my son was 4. He would come every night. He wouldn't eat dinner until he was with the three of us were together, and my son would have dinner at the hospital. They had like leftovers from because visitors came just after dinner, and so
Yeah.
he'd sit and we'd have what my son would call, he was 4, dinner as a family, and he just was a highlight to of the evening to all the other patients,
I
because
bet. Yeah.
it was just, and he'd be playing checkers, and it was with my husband and stuff. It was really sweet. It was nice to have.
What coping skills did you use to get through those days?
Well, I've always been a believer in, I wasn't medicated until I was 30. I did psychotherapy before that. So as my illness progressed over my lifetime, I turned to medication in addition to psychotherapy. So I've used those as my 2 main coping mechanisms. And I also have used writing as, later in my life, as, starting with the blog. I mean,
Yeah.
I was somebody who journaled occasionally before that. And I am always somebody who gets help when I need help, and I explain to people what's going on. So even if I might not look like it, because I might have good coping mechanisms of
Yeah.
I explain this is what's going on. So I think in a way I have intellectualization as being one of my coping
Right.
mechanisms.
I mean, people don't know just looking at you.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, if they saw you in the store,
Right.
they're not going to know anything's going on.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Uh,
So
let's talk about your bipolar thoughts. Can you tell our audience the differences between what's called bipolar 1 and bipolar 2?
right. Actually, interestingly enough, I thought I had bipolar 2 way after I actually apparently was diagnosed bipolar 1. So one of the differences was that I was told is if you need to be hospitalized, you're bipolar 1.
Okay.
I mean, my hospitalization was voluntary, but still, if you need hospitalization to stabilize, that means you're bipolar 1.
Okay.
Bipolar 2 is less severe. It's really a matter of it being a spectrum illness. And so bipolar 2, you have cyclothymia, which is very mild, just sort of like more intense mood swings than normal. And then bipolar 2 is also sometimes called bipolar 3. Bipolar 2 has hypomania. So rather than have mania, it has like this milder version, and depression, but not needing well, you might need medication, but not needing hospitalization. And then bipolar 1 can have a severe mania, with which and that can range from sometimes having psychotic thoughts to just being something that interferes more with your life than say a hypomania would. So when I experience, because even within, because I'm medicated, I might experience hypomania. Hypomania might be racing thoughts, trouble falling asleep, irritability, as opposed to not being able to sleep for a week. You know what I mean? Or, a psychotic thought process, things like that. So it's really a matter of degree.
Okay. Yeah, like you said, it's a spectrum. Tell us what you mean by being the outsider, because you referred to that in the book. And what kind of thoughts did you have to deal with?
I think I lost you.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Ron?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay. I didn't hear you for a while.
We might.
So you said explain what being an outsider is.
Yeah. Let me repeat that. Tell us what you mean by.
I lost you again.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Tell us what you mean by being the outsider, and what kind of thoughts did you have to deal with, and talk about the mood swings.
Okay. I felt like an outsider actually before I was ever diagnosed as bipolar, because I think I moved so much. I was always going from one culture to another. And, going from like the East Coast to the West Coast, or going from Saudi Arabia to Massachusetts, very extreme culture changes. And similar to that, having a mental illness and having thought processes which are distinctly different than normal thought processes, you feel like an outsider because people really don't know what's going on inside your head, and you really don't know, are other people thinking this way?
Right, right.
It's just like, well, I don't know. So do other people feel like pushing people in front of the BART train? I mean, I didn't do any of these things, but I had to like fight with different impulses and thoughts that were irrational, and were I guess what you would call in the biz ego dystonic. They did not sync with my sense of self. Okay. So that I didn't have like feelings behind them, or it did not make sense to me that I was thinking these things or feeling like doing these things, because they were just so off the wall. So I wouldn't do them, and I would struggle with these thoughts, and I had some very disturbing thoughts and impulses, but I would stop myself. I mean, I wouldn't do it. I just would just observe the thought and let it go. So, and luckily some of the cognitive behavioral therapy helped with that. And also, just in training my brain. And I also was somebody who used to actually do some self-harming and would dissociate. And I guess the good part of that is in dissociating, you kind of remove yourself. So you learn how to remove yourself. So you stop and self being able to observe yourself from afar.
Gotcha. That's the name, outsider. What are some of the challenges of parenting and caretaking when you're struggling with your own mental illness?
Yeah, it's hard. I think that one of the things that became clear to me once I became a mother was that I had to be stable to be a good mother. That I had a responsibility to my son to, do everything I could do to be as stable and as healthy mentally as I could.
Yeah.
And I ended up having a very high needs son who struggled with ADHD and anxiety and depression and migraines, which were kind of all, tied in together. The migraines and anxiety and depression are often tied in together because it's just so horrible as a 2-year-old having these horrible migraines. So he struggled with that, and then parenting him was a struggle too. Luckily, I had clinical experience as a psychotherapist working with children and adolescents, so I was able to bring those skills to the table. And I just was very proactive. I took him to see a child psychologist when he was 4, and he was seeing a child psychiatrist when he was 5. So, I just knew, no, you help your kid.
Yeah. Very proactive. Yeah.
Very proactive. And now he's a successful 21-year-old young man. He is going to college. He's living independently. I mean, he's dependent on us financially because he's a college student, but he's living independently in his own apartment. So he's very successful. And so I'm a huge believer in early intervention.
Absolutely.
So when people say, don't medicate your kids, I'm like, well, either he wanted to be medicated. He did not like how he behaved when he wasn't medicated, because he would get this red zone and act out violently. But when he was medicated for his ADHD, he was able to, when he was very young, he was able to go to school and function. So, with his peers. And that was very important to him.
Kitt, what advice would you give to someone trying to balance work or parenting with caring for their own mental health? What advice would you give them?
I would say your mental health comes first, because you can't do the other things without first taking care of yourself.
Okay.
And I didn't always do that. I was a workaholic. People with bipolar are easily taken advantage of by people because I was super productive.
I bet.
I was extremely productive.
You probably won some awards, I'm sure.
Yeah, so I was, but that's not good for you to work until 10 p.m., 11 p.m. at night.
No,
You have to have balance in your life.
right.
And when you're a parent, even more so.
Yeah,
So as an individual, you need to take care of yourself. And then as a parent, you need to take care of yourself also, because that child or children need you to be the best parent possible.
that's great advice. Tell us, do the seasons and hormonal changes affect bipolar?
Everything affects me. so there are
Everything. All
some,
right.
yeah, I mean, when the days are shorter, that means you're getting less light, and so more like
Right.
I'm more likely to become depressed. When the days are longer, and I'm getting more light, I'm more likely to become hypomanic. When I'm overstimulated in any way, like socially, for example, if I get overstimulated, I start to ramp up, and when I'm understimulated, I get depressed. So everything is a balancing act. It's
Everything.
all a balancing act for me, and I have to be very careful.
So in 2013, your blog is born and your father-in-law is seriously ill. Tell us about expressive writing and the reason you write and eventually wrote the book.
Yeah, well, it's my father-in-law was had suffered sepsis, and then when he was in the hospital had a stroke. And so my husband went up with his siblings and to be there. And he, at the very beginning, it was just touching though, and I became so anxious. It triggered hypomania in me, and I had to cope with, and I think it triggered some anxiety, knowing, oh my gosh, this is the time of our life where our parents are at that, might die. I mean, our parents are older. Like all of a sudden it hit home. Like
Yeah.
this is the chapter that we're in our lives right now. My father-in-law might pass. My father-in-law has had this very serious, severe illness, and then a stroke. And in order to cope with it, I had to write, just to get out thoughts. And
Sure.
so that's how the blog was born. I had designed websites professional, like as not professionally as my primary profession, but I'd be in a job and I'd be like, oh, you need a website, so I design a website, or, oh, you need a database, or, oh, you need, whatever. So I had already designed websites. And when I designed my first website and, registered the first URL, which is the website address, I imagined, or I visualized kittomalley.com. And I visualized, and this was way before I ever started blogging, I visualized putting my writing on kittomalley.com. So for some reason, I always knew I would do it.
Yeah, you had that inkling right away.
I knew it was going to happen. So, and so that was the trigger that got me to start writing.
As a blogger, do you interact with your followers?
Yes. I mean, I have been inactive since my mother passed. My mother passed, and then right afterwards, in January 2020, my mother passed, and right afterwards, the pandemic came out, and it was just a lot for me to cope with, and and my husband working at home, and it just my son not being at school. It was a lot. So I haven't been writing recently. But when I was writing actively, and actively on social media, I was interacting. Yes, I mean, in terms of comments on the blog and people on Facebook, and I mean, I'm on a whole bunch of different social media platforms. So when I'd write a post, it would publish to different social media platforms of mine, and then also I'd post photos and stuff like that on different, on Instagram, for example, or Facebook. So.
Okay.
So yes, I was very actively involved and had a communication and a community. And actually, that's how, when I first blogged, I was part of a blogging community. And it first was just the blogging community in general through WordPress,
Yeah.
WordPress's community. And then it was specifically gravitated towards the community, both of writers, people who identify as writers, and people who identify as mental health advocates. So, and there's a lot of crossover in those two communities. Many people with mood disorders are writers. And many famous writers have had mood disorders. There's a big big
Yeah,
Venn
cool. Yeah,
intersection there.
commingling. Yeah. Tell us about how your purpose changed over the years and what started out as self-help and has grown to helping others, and the things that you are involved with that permit you to do that.
Well, I think that over the years, as you mature, or as I've matured, I've known a lot of people who became mental health advocates right off the, out of the, right as soon as they were diagnosed, which
Right.
I didn't do. I mean, I was involved. Well, I guess I was a psychotherapist, so and I did do volunteer work in high school and in hospitals. So I actually do have a history of being a helper,
An advocate. Yeah.
But in terms of the mental health advocacy, it just, I think it just followed, and I actually became involved in NAMI's, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, their programs, and you start with a peer-to-peer program if you're somebody with a lived experience of having a mental illness, and there's like they identify a progression in your, the life cycle of maturing with living with a mental illness. And at some point, it's natural that people both with lived experience or with family members, who have somebody in their family, that at one point in time, they're ready to do advocacy. And so that's sort of a natural progression, where you're like, okay, now it's time to share my knowledge, my experience.
Right.
And so that's just sort of was a natural progression, and it came from a lot from my involvement with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and I'm thankful for that organization. I was very involved in their Orange County chapter when I was living down in Orange County, California.
Do you feel people with mental illness are sometimes not treated for other illnesses or comorbidities and just dismissed as being, psychosomatic?
Without a doubt. And I mean, I'm lucky in that I've not had that experience. I'm the way I present myself, the way I have a medical vocabulary, I'm able to insist on, respect from providers.
Right.
But I do know that many people do have that experience. And even my son, I've even been told, your son shouldn't be taken to all these different specialists. And, that's what the psychiatrist tells me.
Yeah.
And then the specialists say, your psychiatrist is wrong. There's other things wrong with your son. He does need to see a gastroenterologist. He does need to see a neurologist. You know what I mean? It's not just all psychosomatic. It's like, because there's these comorbidities, like there's things that are actually related to each other. The brain is a physical thing, and the disorders that affect the brain are comorbid with other disorders that are physical disorders. In fact, there's one of the examples is SUNY in New York, upstate New York, the State University of New York, or whatever it's called. They identified what they called ALPIM, which was a genetic syndrome that involves comorbidities in anxiety, laxity, pain, immune, and mood. And they have identified that genetically. Like clinicians have noticed, that these overlapping diagnoses, that a lot of their patients had these other problems, that they weren't psychosomatic, but they were comorbid. And so right now, all we really can do, because we don't know how to treat that genetic syndrome yet, is to treat the symptoms. So you're not just treating the brain, which you have to treat. You have to treat the immune system. You have to treat, if you have asthma or eczema or, the immune issues. You have to treat the pain if you have migraines or other, chronic pain disorders. You have to treat everything. You have to treat the whole person, the whole body.
Right. How have your spiritual beliefs affected your outlook on living with bipolar?
Well, it's enabled me to see it as meaningful and to see it as something I've been able to reframe thing, so that rather than seeing myself as being burdened, even though it is a burden, I see it as
Yeah.
being purposeful, so I'm able to see that, that I have been, I wouldn't say I've been blessed, certainly not, but I have been, that I have a disorder that enables me to help other people. I think it's partly
It's a good way of looking at it.
it's just a way of reframing it.
Yeah.
So, whether or not it's true, whether or not
It's true
it's
to
a way
you.
of like saying, okay, I have this, what can I do with it?
Yeah. What were the major turning points in your life? How did you see those transitions then, and how do you see them now?
Well, it's interesting because when I look back, when my parents before they passed, at one point, my father had dementia, and then my mother had a stroke, and she had vascular dementia, and so both of them had dementia. And at that point, all of my experience, which in my life I thought, wow, I have this very bizarre history, like pre-med, and then law, and then psychology, and then and then real estate. But then all of a sudden, being in the position of making decisions about my parents' health and wealth, they're, they're, and wealth as in managing, their finances, and managing their healthcare, and understanding what they were going through mentally, psychologically, and all that kind of stuff. Every single thing that I had gone through in my life all of a sudden made sense. It's like everything that I've been through has enabled me to have skills that I needed right now.
Right.
So it's interesting because when you're in something, you don't necessarily see the benefit of it. You don't really necessarily see the long view. But when you're mature in your life, you can look back and go, oh, this actually, my life makes some sense.
Yeah. What would you say to someone newly diagnosed with a mood disorder like depression or bipolar? What would you say to them?
I would say there's hope.
Okay.
And then and to get help, and to understand that it can take time to get the right help, the right therapist, the right medication. It's trial and error right now, which is unfortunate, but that's just the reality of where we are. We're getting better at being able to identify what medications can help, different people.
Right.
But it's still basically trial and error.
In other words, don't go it alone.
Don't what?
Don't go it alone.
Don't go it alone. Right. Get help.
Yeah. What advice would you give to family members and loved ones of those living with serious brain disorders?
I would say the same thing. And unfortunately, one of the problems with a lot of people, aside from parents, you're able to, if you're parents of minors, you're able to make decisions and get your kids help. But when your loved ones are adults, you cannot control their lives. So you have to kind of remember the serenity prayer, because you can do the best you can do, and that doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to go and take their medication or get or anything like that. And so that's very hard for people. And even so, there are people whose family members are so severely ill that even if they are taking medication and stuff. So I think that just having compassion and being non-judgmental is important.
Yeah, that makes sense. What takeaway message would you give to our audience concerning mental health illness, if you had to give a takeaway message?
The takeaway is to not judge.
Okay.
And just the same thing I said to have for people with mental illness, to have compassion, to listen, and to know it. Well, 25% of us have suffered or will suffer from a diagnosable mental illness. So I guess, it's very important that we don't stigmatize those who are struggling.
Yes, absolutely. Kitt, what excites you the most moving forward with your advocacy?
Well, I enjoy public speaking. So I'm looking forward to the pandemic getting resolved enough that people can go out and do the kind of work
Yeah.
that I used to do in person.
Right.
Which I haven't been able to do. But that's going forward. I would think one of the things that I'm excited about is advances in science. I'm a real geek, and the advances in brain science are exciting to me. The fact that there are people out there helping other people, and that there's a community out there, and whether or not your local community has resources, there's online communities.
Sure.
You still can connect with things like the National Alliance of Mental Illness, or the DB, Depression Bipolar Alliance, DBSA, is that what it's called? Depression Bipolar Support Alliance.
Okay.
And they're online too. And so there are online support groups. So, and I think that those are, the communities out there are great.
Kitt, we have a lot of people in our audience. If they want to contact you, how do they go about doing that?
Well, they can go to kittomalley.com.
Okay.
So that would be the best way, and all my social media platform links are there on every page.
Okay.
And so they can click on those.
I'm going to list that in the podcast notes. Thank you, Kitt, for sharing your journey with us. I think I speak for everyone listening that we all respect your bravery and your courage in talking about this and giving us an insight into what it is like to live with being bipolar and the challenges it presents. I wish you good fortune and good thoughts going forward. Comments and suggestions to improve the podcast, you can email us at itsarapwithrap@gmail.com. Our website is itsarapwithrap.com. Drop your email address there and we'll get you on the mailing list. We have a Facebook page and group, It's a Rap with Rap. Instagram, It's a Rap with Rap podcast. And all the episodes are on YouTube. It's a Rap with Rap, the podcast uncut. Thanks everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there. And for now, it's a wrap.
Great. Bye-bye.